Hey humans, let's continue working on our NPC character. So if we take a look at this flowchart, the topic of this video is going to be covering the cooldown system so that we can get out of the engaged state and into the searching state. So if you take a look at the scene that we've set up before, what we have so far is if we hit the play button right now, our NPC starts in the non-alert state where it's printing out that message. If we drag our player within the zone, it will switch to the engaged state where it says I see the player. And if I get out of the zone, it never leaves the engaged state. So that's what we're going to take a look at today. There's actually a lot of different ways to implement this cooldown effect. One way, we could use a variable, like a variable called like an engaged timer. Maybe when we detect the player, we start a coroutine that waits that amount of time and then sets our state out of engaged and back into searching. The other thing that we could do is we could create an inline timer using time.time, right? So like we could create a float called engaged timer as well, and a second float called like is engaged or can engage, and we're going to compare that against time.time to slowly increment that timer until we reach the X amount of seconds and then transition out of the engaged state into searching. Honestly, either of these may work. The second option, the one where we're comparing against time.time, might be better because we don't have to like stop and start coroutines and all that. But the first option where we're making a coroutine might be simpler to read and understand. So maybe for now we'll go with a coroutine and know that we might need to change that later. Let's do this. To create a coroutine, it is here I'm going to delete these comments from last time. It's another method that would be on the same line as our onTrigger, enter, and update, but within this final bracket that's in our class. So it'll be on this line right here. And the coroutine uses a keyword called yield. It's great. It allows you to yield for an amount of time. We want our designer to have as much control as possible over this, right? So it makes sense up at the very top here to create a variable for how much time to be engaged, right? For like how long is this NPC willing to be angry and fighting and raging or whatever, running or hiding for cover, whatever it's doing, how long before you want it to change? And we should also serialize that field. That way each NPC could be different. Love that. And then all the way down here, we want to create an IE numerator called maybe something like engaged cooldown routine, whatever that's called. And within that IE numerator, we want to yield for the amount of time specified above. So whatever we call this variable for engaged time, we want to yield for that time. Yield for engaged time. And then after that time is up, we want to switch our current state to the searching state. Cool. But you should know that a coroutine, in order to start it, you can't just call it like a regular method. You actually have to, where would I do this? Where would we start? I guess we would start this coroutine in the engaged state. So instead of seeing the player, we would start coroutine engaged cooldown routine. If you're an experienced programmer and you're looking at this and you can see that there are problems with it, I see them too. There's quite a few things. Like one thing that's going to happen is this switch statement is an update, which means that it's calling like 60 frames a second, which means that this coroutine is starting 60 frames a second. So this timer is counting down again and again and again. Let's just build this broken as it is, and then we're going to fix the bugs as we go. So if you want as a little mini challenge, you can pause the video here and try to implement this coroutine. But if not, no worries. I'm going to show you how to implement this right now. Let's start at the top. So I'm going to create a private float underscore engaged time. Call it whatever you want. And then let's go ahead and serialize the field. So in our NPC on the script down here, it now has engaged time that's 0. Maybe I'm going to set that to be 5 seconds. Cool. The time that you write in the inspector will overwrite what's in your script. So even if I set this here equal to like 15.5f, the 5 that I wrote in the inspector will overwrite this 15. Just something to be aware of. Okay, so now that we have that, let's go ahead and create our coroutine. Private IE numerator, engaged cooldown routine, parentheses, and then open the curly brackets up. Now, an IE numerator is underlined in red like this at the get-go because it requires a yield state statement, at least one, in order for the IEnumerator to be satisfied. Let's yield return, which allows the processor to breathe for however long you specify. And we want a new wait for seconds. And in the parentheses for this, we're going to pass in our engaged, what did I call it? Engaged time. And then we're going to switch our current state equal to the NPC behaviors dot searching. There we go. Now this IEnumerator's name is also grayed out like this because it's not being used anywhere. So we still have to start the coroutine up here. Like I mentioned, it's not calling it like a regular method. So you can't just say, do the engaged cooldown routine. You have to actually start the coroutine and then pass in the name of the routine in parentheses, just like that. Cool. Okay, let's just see if this is even kind of working. Okay, we're just chilling. Let me grab the player. I'm going to move it forward. Now we're in the engaged state. So I'm going to go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, looking for the player. It's now in the searching mode. Perfect. That's working. The problem, there's a few problems with this. So say I enter the collider and it's seeing me, right? I'm still within its collider. But after a second or 5 seconds, it's automatically entering the searching state, which is kind of a problem, right? Because I'm right up in this NPC's face. It should see me. It shouldn't be going to searching. It should be staying in the engaged state, right? So maybe we need to update our flowchart a little bit to accommodate this behavior, like this. So from any state that we're in, if we see the player, we need to go to our engaged state. There are several ways to do this. One thing we could do is we could try to change our onTriggerEnter method to an onTriggerStay so that each frame that our player is within that collider, we will continue to set our enemy state to engage. We could use a bool called like is player within range, and that would be true if the player enters our collider and false when the player leaves. And then in the coroutine, maybe before we change to searching, we're going to check, is the player still within range? And if the player is not in range, then we'll go to searching. The other thing maybe we could do too, to complement that, is we could do an onTriggerExit. So when our player leaves the collider, then and only then start the countdown timer. Dude, there's a lot of options for this. And if you think of another one, maybe even a more efficient one, please let me know. But for this one, like if we go with option 1, where we're going to use onTriggerStay, it's going to continually call the coroutine again and again. And I think it's going to give us some errors, right? It's going to be continually starting and ending that cooldown. You might see some weird behavior. So let's not go with onTriggerStay. So maybe we'll do like a mix. We'll do a mix of using onTriggerExit, we'll use a bool, and before we switch to anything, we're going to check that bool. So yeah, let's use a bool. Private bool, player in range. By default, bools are set to false like this. So now that we have this bool, the is player in range, let's go ahead and comment out this start coroutine line. So this bool, is player in range, when should it be set to true? Well, that should be set to true in our onTriggerEnter, right? So as soon as the player enters our trigger, we can say is player in range, and that equals true. We're also going to need to set this to false as well. When do we set this to false? Well, it makes sense to set it to false when our player leaves that trigger, that collider, right? So let's make a void for onTriggerExit. I'm actually going to duplicate this whole thing right here, Command C, Command V, but change onTriggerEnter to onTriggerExit. So now we are checking, hey, what left our collider? And if the thing that left us is the player, is player in range, should now be false. Now, instead of going to engage, we don't want that. We should call that coroutine, right? To start the cooldown routine. Let's try that. Start coroutine. And the name of the method is the engaged cooldown routine. Now, the whole reason of creating this bool here is for this right here. After the amount of time that we're supposedly engaged for, we need to check if player in range is false. If is player in range equals false, within our curly brackets, wrap that. I hope this makes sense, right? So if our player is actually out of range by the time our engaged cooldown timer has elapsed, only then will we start searching for it. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these comments. Let's go ahead and save the script here and let's see if this sort of fixes that. So our NPC is just chilling. Now we're going to go within his collider and I'm not going to leave. The behavior we're trying to fix is it shouldn't go to searching. It should continue to stay engaged, and it is. It's doing that. Okay. And now I'm going to go outside of the collider. And after 5 seconds, it should go to searching. Yay, searching for player, back in, engaged, back out. It waits 5 seconds. Cool. Okay, this seems to be working pretty well. Feel free to test this out as much as you want as well. I think the next thing, which is very similar to this feature that we just did, is we now need to, the next part of our flowchart is create a searching cooldown timer. All right, great job with this one. I'll see you in the next one.